I mean, I think to be able to sit with John Cena for over an hour was pretty cool because...
Welcome to Lightweight's podcast. My name's Joe. Today's guest, we have Chris Van Vliet.
The last time I saw you...
Is that your Hall of Fame ring?
Did you truly not know?
Are you saying you can't turn heel?
You can do whatever.
How does that WrestleMania match, that WrestleMania moment compare to a few years earlier?
The one with Mick, I had a giant chip on my shoulder.
That was a scary match to watch.
Dude, it was a scary match to be in.
Chris is known all across the internet for his incredible interviews with these iconic wrestling superstars.
I did an interview with Mr. Goldberg, Bill. It's just weird calling him Bill.
So if you like this podcast, please hit the subscribe button.
The brilliance in that show is calling it Who Killed WCW. I was in Toronto, in my hometown, when John Cena surprised us. Roman Reigns over there.
Did you have your arm up?
No.
They just picked you?
It was before we were even at the point where like people were raising hands.
Leave a comment down below who else you want to see on the podcast. And without further ado, Chris Van Vliet.
Look at us. We're both hat guys. Let me just make sure my hat is okay here.
The god of wrestling interviews, Chris Van Vliet.
What?
You get so much respect from the community.
Wow.
Your lineup of superstars is insane. Who is left? Triple H? Is that it?
There's a lot of people left.
Who? Be honest.
I've never interviewed Triple H, Shawn Michaels, Randy Orton, Kevin Owens.
You've never done Randy Orton? I thought you did.
No. We've exchanged messages. I feel like this is going to happen at some point.
So you're calling him out right now?
Randy. The three most important letters in wrestling aren't WWE. They aren't AEW. They sure as hell aren't RKO. They're CVV.
That's a call out. Oh my God.
Please, Randy, don't hurt me. He's a very large man. He's very. And have you seen the shape that he's in lately?
Insane.
Please don't hurt me, Randy. I was just joking.
You're coming hot off your interview with Bill Goldberg.
That was yesterday we recorded that.
What is it like interviewing a legend like that? How does that happen? Where do you go? How do you lock it in?
We have a mutual friend in common. So that's where the connection was made. I did an interview with Mr. Goldberg, Bill. It's just weird calling him Bill. But yeah, Bill Goldberg. I did an interview with Bill like 7 years ago. He was at a charity event in South Florida where I was living at the time.
Did he remember?
Yeah. No, we've kept in touch ever since. He's the best. He is such a kind man, and I love spending time with him. But at that event, we do this interview in my friend Uncle Louie's RV, and then afterwards, it's like a charity event. There's a barbecue going on, and I said to my buddy, I go, do you think that Goldberg would put me up in the jackhammer? He's like, I don't know. Go ask him. And I'm like, hey, Bill, like I did a little bit of wrestling training when I was younger, and like I know how to take a bump. Do you think you could put me up in the jackhammer? He's like, yeah, sure, let's do it right now. And I'm like, what? And sure enough, 3 seconds later, he puts me up in the jackhammer and then very nicely puts me down. But oh yeah, it was so cool.
How's his physique nowadays?
He's 57 and he's in incredible shape. I mean, if I could be in the shape that he's in at that age, I'd be a very happy man. I don't know that he's in ring shape right now, and he would tell you that, but he still wants one more match. Who knows?
Did he mention with who, how, where?
The story here is, and for anybody who knows anything about WWE, he agreed to do the match with Roman Reigns at Elimination Chamber that is now his final match. It was 2 years ago. The idea was that he had an agreement with Vince, like, yeah, I'll do that match, but you owe me one. Like, you owe me my retirement match. So he flies to Saudi Arabia, does this match with Roman Reigns, and never got another match. And now Vince obviously isn't with WWE, so this promise that he got from Vince can't be fulfilled if Vince isn't the guy. But he still very much thinks like, I want another match, and I was promised another match. Will it ever happen? Who knows?
Did you guys discuss it?
I said, do you want one more? And he's like, well, yeah, I want to like end things on my own terms. He's like, I was kind of forced into retirement. I don't know if it's going to happen. A lot of his focus now is on his son, Gage Goldberg, who just got accepted to Colorado. He's playing under Deion Sanders, which is crazy because full circle, Goldberg used to play with Deion Sanders for the Atlanta Falcons. Fast forward now, his son is playing for Deion Sanders. It's a pretty crazy story, but Goldberg's focus now is on his son and on his son's football career.
Where'd you record it at?
At Bill's house. So again, crazy calling Goldberg Bill. Yeah, Bill's house. We did it at his house just outside of San Antonio, and he lives on 200 acres. As I'm pulling into the gate, he's like motioning over. I'm like, what? So I roll down the window of my car, and he goes, yeah, there's 3 kangaroos that live over there. His wife loves animals, and she's a veterinarian, so they look after like kangaroos and zebras, and they like heal them back up. Oh, it's incredible.
And it's just the two of you doing all this?
It's just the two of us all day.
The boys just hanging out.
Just hanging out.
All day. What else do you do? What's life like outside of that podcast when you interview a legend like that?
Well, I got to his house. I didn't even actually see his house. I got to his property, and he has Goldberg's Garage. He has a YouTube channel. Goldberg's Garage is a 21,000 square foot garage with a gym above it. And he has, I think it's 35 cars in there. Like, he loves 70s and 80s muscle cars, like loves them. So we kind of just hung out in his garage all day, like just hung out. Eventually we set the cameras up and had a great conversation. And then we went out to lunch after. What a day.
Where'd you go to lunch?
His friend owns this amazing Tex-Mex spot in town. So we went there, and I thought he was going to eat like Bill Goldberg would eat, right?
What's it, get a salad?
I mean, we ate like a burrito bowl, and it was incredible. But I ate more than him. I was so hungry. They brought out like the chips and queso, and I'm just like, I'm crushing it. And I realized I eaten like 17 chips, and I'm like, oh, wait. Are you going to have some? He's like, I don't want to fill up too much. Wait till the meal comes. I'm like, oh, well, I'll just keep stuffing my face then with chips and queso.
When you fly out to these crazy interviews like Bill Goldberg, The Undertaker, Hulk Hogan, how do you plan outside of the conversation? Are you guys expecting to go hang out afterwards, or is that only if the conversation goes great and they're like, hey, you want to go grab food?
Never expecting that. And I mean, you do the same thing, right? You're traveling all over to get these massive interviews. The expectation is really only what happens from like when you hit record to when you stop hitting record, right? The focus is always on this right here in front of you, like just being present and trying to make this the best conversation possible. Anything else on top of that is like the icing on the cake. But
so that's you and Bill being buds afterwards.
That's pushing it. I don't know if we're buds, but
getting lunch is if he didn't like you, he wouldn't go out with you, let alone invite you to his house.
Well, he goes, where are you heading to after this? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to the airport. He's like, do you have time to get some lunch? I'm like, well, I'm not supposed, how can I say no to that? Of course, yes. Yeah,
I'll move my flight. I'll stay another
Absolutely,
day.
yeah, whatever you need.
That's insane.
Yeah, so I love bass fishing, and he has a pond on his property. And I'm like, oh, do you have bass in there? He's like, oh, yeah, we got like some 10-pounders in there. I'm like, oh, man, I love bass fishing. He goes, next time you're here, come early in the morning. We'll do some bass fishing together. I wonder if that'll actually happen.
Next time, I'm free tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll just move my flight. I'll call the airline right now.
Who do you think is the wealthiest superstar that you've ever interviewed?
It's probably The Rock. But I know The Rock.
Have you been to his house?
No, I wish. No, I've never been to The Rock's house.
I'm sure he's got houses everywhere, right?
Yeah, I think so I know when I lived in Florida, The Rock had a house in Southwest Ranches, which is around like Fort Lauderdale. So that's one. I know he has a house in Hawaii. The house that he posts on social media where he's bass fishing, that's in Virginia, I believe. I think that's his main residence. I hope I didn't blow up his spot there. And I think he has a house here as well. So I think he has at least 4.
Who's
So
Jim?
The Rock's got to be the most wealthy, but I know he falls into 2 categories, right? He's wrestler and he's also celebrity and actor and media mogul and everything.
Whose house were you most impressed at when you got to there?
Look, I haven't recorded a lot of interviews at people's houses. Undertaker's was pretty cool. Like, he lives on an obscene amount of land in Texas as well.
Is 15-year-old Chris just mind-blown?
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're going to these guys' houses.
Yes.
They're sitting down with you for an hour and just answering all of your little questions.
And here's the thing about the Undertaker one is I was a guest on his podcast that morning, which I can't believe that's a real sentence.
Did you know that was happening?
So his co-host, Matt Lyda, who is such an awesome guy, reached out to me and he was like, we've got some 6 Feet Under merch that we want to send you. And I'm like, hell yeah, of course. Here's my address. And we're thinking about having you as a guest on the show. Maybe we could work something out where you're a guest on our show and then you interview Mark after, Mark being the Undertaker. I'm like, let me know.
That was the
I will
proposal
be there.
initially.
Yes. And I'm like, how is that a real proposal? Yes. Like, just tell me the date and I will make it happen. I don't care what's going on. I will drop everything to make this happen.
When this happens, who are you telling immediately? Is your wife going crazy too, or is she?
So we were actually, when I found out that it was actually happening.
Do you have boys that you text right away?
Yes, of course. And then like everybody, all the editors on my team and all the graphic designers, they're all wrestling fans too. So I'm sending them a message as well. But I found out when we were back home visiting my wife's family in New Jersey and we were just about to go to bed. And I was like, babe, you'll never believe this. Next Monday, I'm going to Austin. I'm going to interview The Undertaker. She's like, oh my gosh, this is huge for you. This is amazing. The crazy thing about that day was I went to the studio that they rent in Austin first. I meet The Undertaker in person. I'd done something with him over Zoom, but never in person. So I meet him. That's awesome. We sit down. I'm a guest on his show. And then he's recording 2 more episodes that day of his show. They batch record. Then we were going to do the episode of my show later. So I'm like, well, where do you want to record this? And he goes, oh, I don't know, whatever's easier for you. I'm like, well, no, whatever's easier for you. Like, you tell me. I'm happy to rent this space. I'm happy to, just tell me what the hourly rate is. I'll rent out the space you're in right now. We can do it at your house if that's easier for you. Whatever. Yeah. Why don't you just head over to the house? So I'll be done here around 4. Why don't you head up to my house around 3? I'll give you the code to get in. When you get to the property, you're going to see the main house on the left. You'll see the gym on the right. Just go over to the gym, push the door open, and then flick on the light switch and just set up in there. And yeah, I'll be over later on. And get a workout in if you'd like. What? Oh yeah, when you get into the neighborhood, first you'll see the guard. Let them know that you're going back to my house. Then you'll get to another gate later on, and here's the code for that gate. Then you'll get into my neighborhood after that. Wow. Yeah. So we were just hanging out in the Undertaker's gym, setting everything up, and just waiting for this to happen. Then when he came in, I said, how long do you have? Like, how long do you want to talk for? He's like, man, we can talk till you got all the stories out of me.
Wow.
There's no time limit.
How do you prepare for an interview with that?
I just had a list of topics I just wanted to go over.
Are they oriented in a certain way for you to steer the conversation so that it's all fluid?
I've got just a lot of notes. I'm sure it's the same for you. They're never in order. Like if he says something that links down to a topic I had at the bottom of the page, boom, we go right into that.
Is that already in your head of what you need to talk about with him?
Yeah.
You study it before to make sure.
Yeah, it's been in my head for 30 years. I feel like.
Yeah, back when you were watching WrestleMania 1993,
Right.
You were like, okay, I got to ask him.
Yeah, watching him debut in 1990 and oh yeah. Yeah, there's legends like that I feel like you don't even need to prep for.
Are there things that came to your mind days after that you wished you asked? Because that always happens to me.
Yeah, always.
Because for some reason, I do even more digging after I realize how cool they are. I'm like, oh, I should listen to more podcasts and study.
Yeah, I was like, if we ever do this again, I feel like we've already got 2 more hours worth of stuff. Yeah, it's crazy.
What were you most mind blown at what he told you?
I think just overall, I was mind blown by, he is a larger than life, globally recognizable personality. Whether you like wrestling or not, you know who The Undertaker is.
That dong comes on. Blink-182 just used it for their entrance, for their tour.
Wasn't that insane?
Yeah.
Crazy. What I was most blown away by is just how down to earth he is. He is such a nice person and he's such a genuine person. And the character that he played for so many years was terrifying. And he couldn't be any further from that person. That was the thing that blew me away the most.
Do you think The Undertaker would have survived in today's world?
If he debuted now?
Yes.
Sure. Yes. That character is iconic. I think that character for sure would have worked in any era.
And he would have had to stay away from podcasts, not do public appearances to keep that mystique going?
I think he'd have to treat it a little bit differently. And I think that the line now between what's character based and what's reality based has been blurred a lot. Kayfabe has been broken quite a bit. I don't know if he'd be able to be in character 100% of the time like he was in the 90s, but that character would work for sure. What made that character work so well during that era is the fact that he never broke character, ever.
What do you mean?
Like, there's a clip of him backstage at a Cleveland Cavaliers game, like wearing full Undertaker gear.
Oh, like he lived the character.
Yes. Yes. He was the Undertaker. He was not Mark Calloway. He was always the Undertaker.
Did you talk about that?
Yeah. And he's happy that like he gets to be Mark Calloway now. Like that stage of his life is behind him and over. But what a fascinating character.
You're getting the biggest interviews of your career now. Do you think?
It's crazy. And I don't know how we're going to keep this up. Because when you look at the last 6 months, it's been some really big names. Yeah, it's been like, if we go back to the tail end of last year, Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair, and then it's Undertaker and Rey Mysterio and Cody Rhodes, Goldberg again. Like, there's some really big ones. I don't know how we top this.
Who's reaching out to who?
Oh, they're not reaching out to me.
I'm sure some people are.
They're not reaching out to me. I'm just trying to have the most interesting conversations. Like, think about this, Joe. How lucky are we to be in the position that we're in to, for an hour, sit here and just siphon off someone's knowledge for our own like selfish benefit. And it's cool that we get to share it online, but how lucky are we that we get to do this? Like, you get to talk to your favorite band or your favorite actor, your favorite comedian, your favorite wrestler, and just ask them the questions you've always wanted to know the answer to. That's so cool.
Who do you have lined up that you can leak?
Who do I have lined up?
Spill some juice.
Well, the Goldberg interview I haven't announced anywhere else. So that's a big one. That's a very big one that's happening.
Have you done Sting?
No, and I've been trying. I just don't think he wants to do many interviews. I mean, think of, what's the last Sting interview you remember? Right. I don't know. I would love to do a Sting interview.
Who else do you have lined up? Sorry, I cut you off.
Lined up, we have Beth Phoenix. She doesn't do a lot of interviews. And when I did the interview with Adam Copeland at their house, he's promoting Pure Plank, which is it's incredible. And that's how him and Christian Cage were able to get into the best shape of their lives. So we talked a bunch about that. Well, obviously Beth is on board with Pure Plank too. So I'm going to talk to her about Pure Plank and also just about her career. Chad Gable just agreed to do an interview with me.
That's huge.
He's on such a roll right now. And then I got a random DM. This was crazy. The day that I had Will Sasso in studio, Will Sasso does the absolute best Jesse Ventura impression. The same day that he was in the studio, Jesse Ventura DM'd me on Twitter. Jesse Ventura's son. Hey, we'd love to find a way for Jesse to be on your show. I'm like, what? Like, how is this real life? I just heard your voice. I mean, it was Will Sasso doing your voice, but I just heard Jesse Ventura in our studio, and now I'm getting a DM, and now we're setting up this interview. So that one's happening soon as well. And then there's a lot of like maybes and a lot of like, oh, we'll set this up. We haven't picked a date. I'll tell you about one off camera because I don't want to put it out into the world in case it doesn't happen. But a really big one. We've been going back and forth and trying to like firm up a date. Hopefully that one works soon, but that'll be a big one.
You've talked to Goldberg, Booker T.
Oh yeah, Booker T.
I'm sure you've done all the research on everything WCW. What do you think killed WCW?
Well, that documentary or that docuseries is fascinating. I don't know if it can be pinpointed to just one thing. The brilliance in that show is calling it who killed WCW. Like it was one person who did it. I think what happened, and I think that the kind of generally agreed upon story is that the wrestlers got a little bit too much power. The inmates started kind of running the asylum. That's really what happened with WCW. A lot of booking choices that were being made at that time.
Aside from Hulk, what do you mean?
Oh, like when Kevin Nash was booking things there, and there were some decisions that were being made, and people were getting paid a lot of money to not do a lot of things. I think that was one of the big things that happened there. And they just didn't handle that stuff well. But if it wasn't for what WCW was doing in 96, 97, 98, we wouldn't have had the Attitude Era. We wouldn't have had the success of WWE and everything that came after that.
That's when I hopped on the Monday Night Wars.
Monday Night Wars.
I'll never forget flipping between the channels every commercial break.
Yes.
I don't want to miss anything. And then when WWE would go like 8 minutes over the time slot, it was crazy.
And then Nitro would start at 8:59 instead of 9 o'clock. I loved the little games they were playing. And it was exciting. I also think that wrestling now is getting back to where it was in the late 90s, where it's hot again. It's bleeding into pop culture. And it's exciting again. And if you were someone who watched wrestling 10 or 20 years ago and you were a lapsed fan, you're coming back because you've been hearing so much about the great storylines that are happening.
I think Netflix is only going to blow it up.
Oh, man. WWE on Netflix is going to be a game changer. Like, it's going to be one of those moments where we go back and go, do you remember what it used to be like? Because it wasn't like this. Like, uncensored is going to be one of the biggest things. The fact that it's not censored on Netflix.
What extent do you think that's going to go to?
I'm very curious to see.
Flying F-bombs?
I don't think it's going to be like that. It's not a PG product anymore as of January, I think. I think that's obvious. Maybe we see an F-bomb or two. Maybe there's a little bit more blood. Maybe I think they're just going to push the envelope a little bit and see what they can get away with. But if they're doing this every single week, you've got 52 tries a year to see what works and see what doesn't.
Have you heard the rumor that Shane is trying to buy AEW?
No, I haven't heard that. To buy it?
Yeah.
Why would Tony Khan need to sell it, though?
That was just a rumor.
I've heard the rumor that he would go there as a performer or that he would go there as maybe part owner. I don't think that's going to happen. What do I know, though? I know nothing. I know very little.
Do you prefer live events or watching from home on your 85-inch TV with the Michael Cole commentary?
I do not have an 85-inch TV.
Because I can't picture wanting to go to a live event during the sign era, visually not being able to see so much of the show.
I think that people forget that signs weren't held up the whole time. Like, signs are held up kind of intermittently throughout the matches or the entrances, but they weren't held up like the whole time. There is nothing better than the visual from the late 90s of all of those signs. When they cut to the wide shot at the opening of Raw and you've got all the signs there.
So watching from home
was so good.
That's what I would want. I feel like the visual was so impacted. Because when I went to see Blink-182 the other day, there was a really, really tall guy in front of me, and I couldn't see the left side of the stage.
But there's something about the energy of being there live. And there's also something about going, I was there. Like, if you were there for some of the biggest moments in wrestling history, you were able to go, man, I remember the feeling of that. I remember being in that building and being surprised by that. That's a lot cooler of a story than going, man, I remember that time I was sitting on my couch watching that television program. That was cool.
Oh, I don't know. I'll never forget sitting on my couch this WrestleMania.
Right. And I'll never forget being in Philadelphia for that WrestleMania.
What live match do you wish that you were able to see?
Oh,
in all of history?
I don't know if it's a match, but I wish I was there when Hulk Hogan joined the NWO. When Hulk Hogan was the third man and he turned heel and nobody saw that coming. I wish I could have been there when he joins Hall and Nash, forms the NWO. That's such a turning point in wrestling history. Because if it's not for the NWO getting formed and starting to build their traction, we don't get the Monday Night Wars, we don't get DX, and we don't get everything else that led into the Attitude Era and everything else. So to be there, Hogan's walking out. Oh man, he's a good guy. He's got to be he's got to be coming out to help. What? The leg drop out of nowhere? That's one. And then Undertaker getting thrown off Hell in a Cell, because it comes out of nowhere. It's not like there was a big build up to it. It's not like they teased it a bunch of times. They start that match on top of Hell in a Cell, and it's weird. You know, they're walking there and like on top, and it's kind of bending and breaking, and it looks really scary. Then out of nowhere, Undertaker just grabs Mick Foley and throws him off through the announce table. Could you imagine being there live? And first of all, you're like, they're starting the match on top of that thing? This is crazy. And then again, out of nowhere, thrown off the cell. That would have been a cool moment.
What were the wildest moments you saw on TV as a kid that just blew your mind? I was so shocked. Rikishi giving the stink face to Vince because he's the CEO.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
But Vince threw himself into the fire to blow our minds.
Vince put himself in a lot of situations where you were like, wow. Vince getting blown up, that whole thing in the limousine. That was out of nowhere.
Is that the same one where they put the concrete in the limo?
No.
That was a different one?
That was a different one. This is the one where he goes into the limo and you see the foot underneath the door, and he pulls the foot up, closes the door, and as soon as the door closes, the limo blows up. And Vince McMahon, the character, Mr. McMahon, died. And then we're going to really get into the weeds with this story, but then everything happened with Chris Benoit, and Vince came out like as Vince McMahon, not the Mr. McMahon character. And like had to talk about that and completely broke character.
Was that the next week?
Was it 1 week or 2 weeks later? Yeah, it changed that entire storyline, and obviously changed the course of WWE for a while. Do you remember the Katie Vick storyline?
No, tell me.
Oh boy, it might be the worst storyline in wrestling history. Raw ends one episode with Triple H coming out and saying to Kane, "I know about Katie Vick." And it's like, what? What does this even mean? And then the episode ends. And then there's this ridiculous storyline that Kane had this girlfriend, Katie Vick, who dies, and then it turns into...
Is this Kane with the mask?
Yeah, and it turns into Triple H putting on a Kane mask and pretending to have sex with a dead body in a casket. And I remember watching that and just being like, what is going on here? Who said this was a good idea?
What year are we talking?
That's a great question. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to Google it. Early 2000s?
You're slowly unlocking the memory in my head.
It's so 2002. It's very, very bad. That's one I remember watching and going, I can't believe this in the worst way possible.
Were there any storylines that just really got under your skin? Because I personally hated the right to censor.
Well, then
Steven Richards was so good at being that villain.
They did their job very well.
So good.
And the thing that was so good about Right to Censor was that entrance theme was so annoying.
So annoying.
So as soon as that...
And then they kept recruiting people. I'm like, when's it going to end?
And the people they were recruiting were like the best characters. Like The Godfather and Val Venus. No! They were so fun.
They were.
Yeah.
Such a good storyline.
Godfather hated that character.
Did he?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because the Godfather was over, right? He brought out the hoe train, and then they turned him into the Good Father. And everything that got him over was taken away. I mean, to make him a bad guy. He was not a fan of that.
When you're interviewing these people and they're saying stuff like that, is it kind of just determined, okay, well, now this is the direction that the character is going to go, and they just have to try and do their best portrayal?
It's no different than being on a television show.
Right.
You know, if you were on Friends and the script says you have to do this thing, you wouldn't go, well, yeah, but Monica wouldn't really do this. So, yeah, I think that we should change the script. You would just go, yeah, that's great. I'll see you at rehearsal.
Out of all the interviews you've ever done, who had the portrayal that they just were so uncomfortable doing? Not uncomfortable, that they just couldn't nail, that they knew they couldn't nail, but they had to try and get it over.
Well, I think that the characters that work the best are the ones where you dive all the way into it and you do whatever you can to make it work. You fully immerse yourself into it. Think about when Cody Rhodes was Stardust. You could tell he didn't enjoy being that character, but he went all the way into it. And he told me recently, he was like, if I didn't fully commit to that character, there'd always be the question in my mind of like, oh, did it not work because I wasn't fully committed to it? Think about Eugene. Like, that's not an easy character to play at all. And Nick Dinsmore had like, I think a week or 2 weeks to put that character together.
Put it together how? He had to get the costume. He had to get his own stuff.
Everything. Just like, this is your character. You're gonna be a very special young man. You're gonna be the nephew of Eric Bischoff. And in, I think it was a week, he figured out, okay, well, what would he look like? What would he talk like? What would he wear? How would he walk? And he put that character together and went all the way in, fully committed to it. And that's the best work that Nick Dinsmore did. And I think it's in the moments where characters don't get over when you don't put all of yourself into it. You can kind of tell that somebody's holding back. And that's when it doesn't work.
I remember being so confused with the Billy Gunn, Chuck Palumbo combo. I couldn't figure it out.
But they went all the way in on that one too.
And I watched your Billy Gunn one, and exactly, they went all in.
Billy and Chuck were so underrated as just a tag team, like for what they were doing in the ring, and also for their commitment to that character or those characters. It was way ahead of its time. Way ahead of its time. And that turned into a great storyline with 3-minute warning and the Billy and Chuck wedding. There was a lot of really interesting stuff that was going on there. But if both Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo weren't fully committed to that happening, that would have it would have fizzled out so quickly.
But it made it such a moment.
Oh, here we are 20 years later.
Still talking about it, still thinking about it.
Exactly. And somehow Billy Gunn is still wrestling at 60.
When I went to AEW and he came out, I looked at my wife. I said, I think I know him, but there's no way. This is like 30 years ago. That can't be him. He's more ripped now than ever.
He's in insane shape.
What is he, 62?
He's 60.
60.
He's in better shape now than he was when he debuted in WWE. Half a lifetime ago.
Do you remember those wrestling ice creams?
Yeah. We didn't have them in Canada, but I do remember them.
Oh, they were the best. But you always got one character. I forget who it was. And then you tried to get Sable. And you tried to get The Rock. But every time you opened it up, it was always the same guy. I remember being so disappointed in the lunchroom.
I'm trying to think of who would be the disappointing.
It wasn't that he was disappointed. It was just like they mass produced this one and then everyone else is rare.
That's so funny.
Who do you think had the best gimmick change? The most successful gimmick change?
Well, when you think about stunning Steve Austin to Stone Cold Steve Austin, they're not even the same at all.
How much time gap was in between?
Just a few years.
You're an encyclopedia of everything. It's so cool to just ask anything. And you're like,
When you look at stunning Steve Austin with the blonde hair and then turning into the character that he became with Stone Cold Steve Austin and really kind of leading the charge in the Attitude Era, Steve Austin, the person, would not have had the success that he had if it wasn't for Stone Cold. And it's crazy to think about that.
What do you mean by that?
If he continued on with stunning Steve Austin, he'd be a mid-carder at best. That was not a main event character. And wrestling is so much about right place and right time, but also right person too. Think about this gimmick change. Isaac Yankem to Kane. Like crazy. He's this weird dentist character when in the 90s they were very heavily driven on like gimmicks. To Kane and tying that into the lore of The Undertaker and it's his brother and Paul Bearer. Brilliant, right? To go from, with great respect, Isaac Yankem didn't really have much of a future there. That's not a guy who's going to win the world title. Kane, though, incredible. And also think about Mean Mark Callis in WCW, who he was even told by WCW, like, yeah, like you don't really have much of a future. To then Vince McMahon giving him the Undertaker character and becoming one of the most legendary wrestlers of all time. I think that those types of stories are so fascinating.
Did Kane and the Undertaker develop the outfits and their personas on their own? How much is that given to them?
I think the idea was given to them. And then maybe from there they figure out like, all right, what would this person talk like or walk like? But Undertaker was doing his thing for a few years before Kane came out. And then the great Kane debut. That's gotta be Kane! It's iconic. But think about those 3 gimmick changes. And we're talking about 3 of the all-time greats. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Kane, and The Undertaker. And those are those moments. Those are those pivotal moments that if they're not given that character and given a runway and an ability to do something with it, they just go off into obscurity. And I'm fascinated by that concept of if Stunning Steve Austin just kept doing his thing, we would not be sitting here in 2024 talking about Steve Austin at all.
Who is your favorite mid-cards in the 2000s?
I love WCW. I also love WWE at the time, but there was something about Shawn Stasiak, and this is a deep cut.
He's so familiar. The name sounds so familiar.
There was something about Shawn Stasiak's character that I just loved so much. It was this perfect mix of like arrogance and swagger, and he was also just absolutely shredded. But he did this entrance. He walked out to the ring, and he had sweat on his forehead, and he flicked it at the camera. Then he had this gimmick where he was Shawn the Star Stasiak, very briefly, and he would sign an 8x10 and leave it on you after he beat you. And I just thought there was something that was so cool about that. So I was a big fan of him. There's a lot of mid-carders from that time. They were really good, like European champions or really good Intercontinental champions. And a lot of them don't get the credit that they deserve. Like Shane Helms, so good as Sugar Shane Helms, also so good as the Hurricane. I mean, he's a fantastic example of just a great workhorse of a mid-card guy. And he's also just a hell of a human being.
He got the best promos.
Stand back. There's a hurricane coming through. His promo with The Rock backstage was like 7 or 8 minutes. It was great. And also, do you remember Hurricane was Hurricane, but he also had his alter ego as Gregory Helms.
Yep.
The reporter. It was so good.
So good.
What's up with that?
What's up with that? Do you remember the tag team era between Dudley Boys, Hardys, Edge and Christian? Who were you always rooting for?
I was heavily inspired by the Hardy Boys.
Same.
As a backyard wrestler, as someone who just jumped on trampolines and did silly stuff, as a kid who was doing swanton bombs off the diving board into the pool, heavily, heavily inspired by the Hardy Boys.
It's crazy to think about how everybody gave their all to really push the product and make it what it was. Because you had to have an entire 2-3 hour program that was just jam-packed, and everyone's trying to top the previous match and be the match of the night.
And when you think about the Attitude Era, everybody on the card, top to bottom, had a storyline.
And you were so invested in it.
Yeah, there was no filler. Nobody was going out there just to like fill 5 minutes. Everything meant something. So even if it was a short match, it meant something that tied into a much larger storyline that was going on at the time. That was one of the most brilliant things about the Attitude Era.
Who do you think had the most impressive title reign? Not just for the sheer number of length, but for the matches that they had to defend it, the promos they cut, how they had to keep it.
Well, I think if you look just overall, the grand scope of wrestling, the title runs that Austin and Rock had and the matches that they ended up having at WrestleMania as a result of those title runs are probably the most iconic from that Attitude Era. I mean, when you think about Stone Cold Steve Austin, like in particular, it's hard to think about him without the championship. Like he was so a part of that main event picture for so long. And with so much love and respect for John Cena, I appreciate that John Cena didn't always need to be chasing the title or the champion, even though he has obviously been 16-time champion. But John Cena also did incredible stuff as the U.S. title, as the U.S. champion. But I think it's got to be Stone Cold or The Rock with just everything that was going on at that time. The Rock with the Rock's $500 shirts, wearing the belt over his shoulder. Like there was just something about that just felt iconic and just really worked for that character.
You were involved in a pretty big moment during a press conference where you asked a question and someone did not like your question.
Paul Heyman's just fantastic.
Most politically correct
But
answer.
I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Like, Paul Heyman is such a brilliant wrestling mind. So Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns come out, WrestleMania 40 night one press conference, and a microphone is put in my face, and I'm like, oh, I've got to ask a question. I'm like, well, the Bloodline storyline's been really interesting here. Like, I should ask something about the Bloodline storyline. And I asked Mr. Heyman. Well, so Byron Saxton goes, all right, question for Roman Reigns over there.
Did you have your arm up?
No.
They just picked you?
It was before we were even at the point where like people were raising hands.
They just called on you?
Yes. A microphone was put in front of my face, and I was like, okay. So I asked him, I mean, it's a very interesting question. Like, he had referenced it many months before, that he said the Bloodline storyline still had a lot more room to grow. They were only in the bottom of the third. Cool. What inning are we in now? And I just love that he just stayed in character the whole time. And he's like, oh, I don't know if you heard the man. He said, yeah, questions for Roman Reigns. And I'm like, oh boy, we're part of something here. This is so interesting. What a fun moment. And then Roman Reigns is like, all right, yeah, shoot. So I could tell, like, oh, this is going to be a thing here. And then next question. And you can see after he says next question, he's trying not to laugh. But then right after that, there's this whole moment where someone behind me, which was a fan, I think this was misunderstood that it was a member of the press. There are a very small select group of fans that are in these press conferences.
They're all scattered throughout.
They're just sitting in the back, few rows, just there observing. They're not asking questions. They're just there.
And you're part of the press section.
Yes. They're there as part of the priority pass package that WWE sells. So when the next person asked a question and said, I acknowledge you, and someone in the back started booing, it was a fan. And then Roman's like, who said that? And it was this girl like one or two rows behind me. And he's like, you with the glasses, get out of here. And people thought he was kicking like a member of the press out. He was not. He was kicking this fan out. She didn't end up leaving, by the way. But it was a really fun moment. What was cool was Paul Heyman then calls back to my question. And he says by name, he goes, to reference Chris's question, this isn't baseball. You don't get 3 strikes. And I was like, oh, that's very kind of him to bring me back into this moment. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Heyman.
What's the energy like at these press conferences?
It's interesting because I never know if they're going to be in character or if they're not going to be in character. You find out pretty quickly based on their first answer if they are or not. But I think the it's high, right? Because you're coming, like the event has just ended. So the energy is high. You've just seen the main event. You've just watched whatever transpired happen. And then you're in there and you're like, we don't even know who we're going to get. And then, out walks Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman. Okay. Out walks John Cena at Money in the Bank recently. Okay. Oh, here's CM Punk. Great. So then you have to start formulating, okay, well, what's a great question that I would ask them, or will I even get called on?
You asked John Cena something too, no?
I did, because he announced his retirement. That was so cool. That's one of those I remember when and where moments. I was in Toronto, in my hometown, when John Cena surprised us and announced his retirement. And I asked him, because he'd been hinting at retirement for a while, for years. So I asked him, why is 2025 the right time to retire? And he gave a great answer about that. The cool thing about John Cena's retirement tour is we get a full year of John Cena. January to December. So that means we get one more Royal Rumble with him. That means we get one more WrestleMania with him, one more Survivor Series, one more SummerSlam, one more Money in the Bank, all of the PLEs. And he has, I think he said he's going to do 30 to 40 dates. I wonder how many matches that's going to be. It's not going to be 30 to 40 matches because you got to set up some of these matches. This reminds me of when Kobe had his final season and when Derek Jeter had his final season, where they go to the opposing stadium and there's like a celebration of like, this is Derek Jeter's last game here. This is Kobe's last game here. And there's a presentation. I think we're going to see that type of thing with John Cena. And what's cool about this is if you see that Raw or SmackDown or a PLE's come into your town and John Cena's announced for it, that's your last time to see John Cena perform live in your city. So if you've ever wanted to see him, now is the time to make it happen. It's a brilliant idea to have a full year of a goodbye to one of the greatest to ever do it. And I'm knock on wood here. Shouldn't even be saying this out loud, but I just hope that he's able to stay healthy throughout the entire run and obviously beyond.
You've sat with him several times.
He's the best.
Do you think John Cena's retirement run will be the end, or will he make another appearance after?
He made it really clear that this is it. And I know that in wrestling, you could never say never because we know how wrestling retirements usually work. But he seemed to make it pretty clear that this is it. And here's the thing, like when you see these classic bands go on their final tour,
there's always another.
And that's the thing, like, does it not cheapen? Like, wasn't that your final tour? So is this your final tour? I truly think that this is it for him. And it sounds like he's going to be doing some stuff behind the scenes, maybe some mentoring or some coaching. But I think as far as his in-ring career is concerned, this is it. Then we get to play a really fun game all year of, all right, who's his WrestleMania opponent? Okay. Who's his final opponent?
Who would be his final opponent?
I think the answer to either the question of who's his WrestleMania opponent or who's his final opponent, or perhaps the answer to both of those questions, Randy Orton is one of his biggest rivals. So I think that's, if Randy Orton's not his WrestleMania opponent, Randy Orton might be his final opponent. But there's also this thing in wrestling where when you do have your final match, you generally lose it. You're putting somebody else over. You're making them look good. You're giving them that little bit of a rub. I could see him putting over like a younger talent, like a passing of the torch moment to someone of a new generation. I don't know who that would be right now, but when you think of 12 months of John Cena, there's a lot of great matches we got to cram into that, right? We've got to see a match with Cody. We've got to see a match with Randy Orton. I'm guessing we'll get another Rock match thrown in there if Rock's still in the mix. There's a lot of really good matches we can get there. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Braun Breaker versus John Cena at some point in time. That one just feels like a match that has to happen.
Do you think John Cena will win his final match?
No, I don't think so. That's what happens in wrestling. When you think of most people's final match, very last match, you're going out and you're back. You're going out making somebody else look good, and you're looking at the lights.
That was poetic.
That's wrestling.
What do you think is the craziest move the WWE pulled to try and get a superstar back on the roster?
Ooh, what do you mean?
When you're talking to all these people, I'm sure they're giving you these behind the scenes stories where maybe WWE wanted to give them one final run or one another try. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind of, oh, I can't believe they did that to try and get you to keep going?
Vince McMahon flying to Cody Rhodes to talk to Cody Rhodes about his contract with AEW was up, but to talk about him coming back to WWE, that was pretty unprecedented. For Vince to fly to him, rather than the other way around, or rather than this being a phone call, for Vince McMahon to fly to Cody Rhodes and then for them to figure out what the next few years of Cody and WWE would look like, that's a pretty big one. That's definitely one that stands out.
Did Cody know that was coming?
I don't know the full story, and I don't know if anyone will ever really know the full story of how things ended with AEW and how Cody was able to go back to WWE. But it sounds like Cody kind of opened the door and was like, I would consider it. And they were like, well, if you're serious, let's set up a time and let's chat. And that's what happened. And what's so funny about that is there were reports at that time from some very reputable sources that were saying Cody's going to leave AEW and go back to WWE. And it was met with such disbelief. No, he's not. Why would you report this fake news? That's unfollow. And I just couldn't believe that people just didn't see that there was any shred of truth to these reports. And sure enough, he was there.
Did you lose your mind?
I was there. WrestleMania 38. It was one of those like worst kept secrets in wrestling. Because if you remember it, it was Seth Rollins didn't have an opponent for WrestleMania 38 in Dallas. And he comes out to the ring, doesn't have an opponent. A lot of heavy chatter, a lot of rumors about it's got to be Cody Rhodes, right? People were finally starting to believe the reports that Cody could actually be there, that Cody would actually leave AEW, which is crazy, right? He was one of the people who started AEW, and now he's going to leave AEW. That in itself is a wild story. But then there was this long pause. Seth Rollins is in the ring, long pause, and then wrestling has more than one royal family. And it was like, whoa, not only is he back in WWE, he's back as the AEW character. He's back as the American Nightmare with the same entrance theme, the same presentation. That was where it was like, oh, okay, we're in a different era of wrestling now.
How do they get that same character?
I believe Cody owned the rights to all that stuff. I mean, he has the tattoo on his neck. I would hope he has the rights to that. He said that he didn't want to come back as any other version other than himself, like other than that version of himself.
Do you know the story of how Hulk Hogan got his character?
No.
Didn't he buy it when some kind of loophole or something?
I don't know. I do know that The Rock had to I think he was renting the trademark for the name
of The Rock.
Yeah. And then as part of this deal where he's a board member on the TKO board, they now gave him the trademark. But I believe he was leasing it or renting it.
So
Yeah.
interesting.
Right?
Because on all of his movies, he used to say The Rock.
It's a funny transition, though. Because in his early movies, he's The Rock. Then he was Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Jinx.
Yeah. Then he became just Dwayne Johnson. And it's a funny transition, not a funny transition, but an interesting one to look at. You can kind of see where his career is and was based on the way that he was credited in the movie.
Who do you think had the most interesting career after wrestling?
I mean, I think the obvious choices are the three actors that obviously come to everybody's mind when you think about
The
life
Rock,
after wrestling.
Batista,
And John Cena. But I'm really impressed with what Diamond Dallas Page has done in his post-wrestling career. Everything that he's built with DDPY and the amount of lives that he's touched, and think about the wrestlers that we grew up loving, whose lives that he changed. Jake the Snake Roberts and Scott Hall are two names that immediately come to mind. The world is such a better place because DDP is in it. And I love that guy, and he's become a good friend. His post-wrestling life is pretty incredible. And he had such a great career in wrestling, but what he's doing now is so impactful.
What do you think of your phone contact list of all these superstars just being in there?
None of this feels real. Is this real? Is this a simulation? Are we in a simulation right now? But I think what's really cool about it, and you know this better than anybody, it's really cool that hard work can pay off. And it's cool that over the course of many years, so it's all of the hours of work that you're putting into the day, and all the days of work that you're putting into a week, and all the weeks of work that you're putting into a month, the months into a year, the years into a decade. It's amazing that all of that compounds on itself, and then you can look back however many years later and go, wow, that's pretty cool that if you look back, because I did this thing with this person, that led to this thing with this person, that led to this, that led to this, that led to this, that, all these bricks lay on top of one another. It's pretty cool, man. I'm the luckiest guy to be able to do this for work.
What do you think is your coolest brick on top of brick line that somebody only reached out because they saw your interview with this person, which saw your interview with this person?
Man. I mean, I think to be able to sit with John Cena for over an hour was pretty cool, because if we go back, it was because Tyler Perry connected us. So if I hadn't done so many interviews with Tyler Perry, then Tyler Perry wouldn't have connected me with John Cena, and then I wouldn't have been able to do that first That was like a 20-minute interview with John Cena that ended up leading to another interview that led to a much longer one. That's probably the coolest one. I've done maybe a dozen interviews with Tyler Perry, and he's been just a really good sounding board. Like he's really kind. He's been a good friend. When I first moved to LA 4 years ago, he was one of the first people I talked to on that drive, like a 40-hour drive. And he's one of the first people I talked to. It was just a brief conversation, but I'd spoken with him earlier that year about maybe I'll move to Atlanta because he was based in Atlanta. There were a lot of movies being filmed there.
Were you going there for him, or you were just gauging
I was
interest?
I was just gauging like my next move. Was it going to be Atlanta? Was it going to be LA? Was it going to be somewhere else? And he's like, if I were you, it'd be LA. And I was like, done. I am moving to LA because you said that. I was going to move to somewhere anyway, but going to move to LA. And the day that I moved, I sent him a little video because it was early in the morning when I left. And I just said, like, I want to say thank you. Like, you're the inspiration behind this, and I'm doing this. Like, today it happens. In 2 days from now, I'm going to be living in LA. I just want to say, like, I appreciate you. Thank you. And a few hours later, as I was driving, the phone rings, and I look on the dashboard, and it was Tyler Perry. So he's just been a really good, like, guiding light for me in this whole thing. And we were chatting one time. He's like, would you ever want to interview John Cena? I'm like, I mean, I've done some junket interviews with him, like shorter interviews, but of course, yes. I'm a big wrestling fan. He's like, yeah, I know you're a big wrestling fan. That's why I asked. And then a few minutes later, he connected us on a group chat. And he's like, John Cena's like, yeah, my schedule's obviously pretty busy, but I understand you're going to be at WrestleMania. Me too. And this was WrestleMania 35 in New York. He's like, I will find some time that weekend and we will do it. It's like, wow. So that's the brick upon a brick. If this doesn't happen, that doesn't happen.
If you could have 1 3-hour Joe Rogan style podcast with any person, who would it be?
I don't know. 3 hours is long, right?
So you'd have to cover a lot of topics, a lot of time.
Although the cool thing about the Joe Rogan interviews is they don't feel like interviews at all. It just kind of feels like you're listening to two guys just like sitting in the basement, like hanging out, or like sitting around drinking a beer. I feel like I could have gone 3 hours with the Undertaker.
Would you do 2?
We just under 2, yeah.
Did you call it, or did you feel like he was tapping out? You tapped out the Undertaker.
We had dinner plans later that night with Maven and the Undertaker and Midian and a bunch of other people. And I knew that if we kept talking, we were going to really be cutting into that dinner time and that reservation. So I was like, we should probably wrap this up soon. So I think we could have gone a lot longer with the Undertaker. I think if there was an interview with Randy Orton or Triple H, or my goodness, if I had the opportunity to ever have talked to Eddie Guerrero, I'd talk all day to him. That would have been a good one.
I really want to see you in Stone Cold.
Oh, yes. That's the one. I've done brief interviews with him, like 5-ish, 10-ish minute interviews.
During what, a press junket?
Yeah. But I've never done like a full-on hour plus with him. So, yeah, he's at the top of the list.
Do any of these people ever talk about the video games that they were in? Would they go in and do their own stunt work for it to get those characters?
They don't.
They don't do anything at all?
No. So they usually hire pro wrestlers to go in and do the motion capture for a whole bunch of the moves and a whole bunch of the entrances. LA Knight actually was the main motion capture guy on the WWE 2K games for years. He talked about that quite a bit in our interviews. So he nailed all the entrances. Like the R-Truth entrance, that's him. The Triple H entrance, that's him. Most of the signature moves, that's him. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's wild.
But also, isn't that crazy that if you're whoever, a famous wrestler, they're not even flying you in to do your own entrance to the video game? They're telling a very talented motion capture actor to go, do you think you can nail these movements? Great. You're doing it tomorrow.
Chris, thanks for coming.
Joe, you're the best. Congrats on everything. I've been watching your channels just absolutely explode since we first connected, and it's amazing to see.
Huge congrats to you. You're pulling in the craziest interviews, and I love checking your feed to see who you have on next.
Wait, who's your next big interview?
I mean, there's always people like
you
in
showed
the docket.
You showed me some that are in the process of editing. Can we drop one of those names?
The Main, Mayday Parade, Carrot Top, Ian Fidance. He's a big comic. I just did him.
Can we talk a little pop punk? What's your favorite Main song?
Oh God, it's so hard because they have so many different eras.
I love their early era.
I think the Main is one of the best bands to reinvent themselves every single album.
Yeah, it's a great point.
When you watch them, they're a band. They dress alike, not dress alike. They dress together.
Yeah.
The music has such a new sound. It's real. You really feel like you're really part of a new era. And then when they start releasing new songs, you're like, wow, I can't believe the self-titled's over already. There's all of them, honestly, all of them. Mayday Parade, I think, is so great. Story So Far just dropped a new album, Blink.
What? Story So Far dropped a new album?
Yeah.
Mayday Parade has a very special place in my heart. Down and to the left.
Yep.
So good.
Did you see Blink?
I still haven't seen Blink. And I appreciate now that it's the Blink that we grew up with.
Yeah.
You know, it's Tom and Mark and Travis. I need to see them. Obviously, life's a little bit more difficult with a baby and another one on the way. But that is definitely still on the list, seeing Blink.
I had Landon Barker come on. That was cool.
Wow. My wife's not a huge pop punk fan. Like, she'll tolerate it. But if I were to be like, date night on Saturday, we're going to a festival to see Blink play, she'd probably be like, why don't you just go with one of your friends? Why don't you call Joe and you guys can go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring you to a premiere the other day.
Yeah?
But then I wasn't able to go. But I wanted to bring you to Twisters.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to see that so bad.
Yeah, I wanted to see, I can't wait to see it.
Do you go to a lot of premieres lately?
Not as much. Not now that I'm living in Orange County and not LA. Mm-hmm. It's you're embarking on a journey.
You're still getting invited to them though, right? From all these different.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because of your podcast? Because in the past year, I've been getting invited to these more than ever.
I think it's because I'm still doing some work as an entertainment journalist. Like, I'm still working freelance for some TV stations. So I'm still covering a lot of these premieres. I'm still being invited to screen these movies. But it's just tough because going from Orange County to LA is, on a good day, an hour and 15 minutes with moderate traffic. But, could be 2 hours. So you're building in like 4 hours of driving to go 41 miles or whatever it is. I don't love that so much.
Do you lock in the press junkets through the television station?
Yes. Yeah, most of the time, yes.
I'm
doing one with Kevin Hart next week.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah, that's a big one.
What movie?
That is, I just got this. So that is, that movie is like loaded up too. It's Borderlands.
That's going to be big. Jack Black's in it. I forget the other people.
Yeah, that's going to, Jamie Lee Curtis is in it. That's going to be, Kate Blanchett is in it. That'll be a good one.
Do you have all your questions for Kevin already?
No. I've interviewed him a bunch of times. He's awesome.
He remembers you?
Yeah. He's always been so great, but it's been a while. I don't think I've interviewed him since The Man from Toronto.
What kind of questions do you try and get from him?
Well, the thing when you do a press junket, you've got to somehow find a way to tie it back to the movie.
Is that for you to try and please the company inviting you?
Well, if you're saying Borderlands comes out, on this particular date, you want some questions that tell you a little bit about the movie or tell you about their characters or ties into the movie in some sort of way so that when this airs on TV, it's not like Borderlands comes out and here's Kevin Hart talking about roasting Tom Brady.
Right.
It needs to tie into the movie in some sort of way.
If you have a few extra minutes, do you sneak those questions in?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
oh, yeah.
Or you'll find a way to break, build it into the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you have 10 minutes, it's really only a few questions and then the fun banter in between.
Well, junket interviews are like 4. Right. So it's 3 to 4 questions if you're lucky.
Is he going to be sitting down the whole time and then interviewers cycle through?
Yes.
So they have the same backdrop?
Yes. And then just every 4 minutes, hey, man, good to see you.
Are you there by yourself?
Yes. Yeah. So that'll be a good one.
Wow.
Thanks for appeasing my pop punk talk.
Who else are you listening to?
I still go back to that era of early 2000s. Like when I think about the main, I think of She's fresh to death.
Can't stop, won't stop, baby.
Such a good song. Like that album. That's what got me hooked on the Maine.
I just had them sign.
Oh, let me see.
My American
wow.
Candy.
Wow.
I've had this forever and I completely
Let me
forgot.
see this.
So then I brought it to them and John and
Wow.
Pat signed it.
Vinyl. Look at that.
I don't know why. I just like collecting them.
See, I'm so...
That's my Mayday Parade vinyl up there signed.
Hey.
And then Carrot Top signed.
Dude, that's awesome.
As you can see, the camera's not on it, but there's other artists
Yeah.
that are down the pipeline, hopefully.
Oh.
But I'm trying for that one really hard.
Okay. Yeah.
There's talks.
They live here.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Or he lives here.
Possibly, maybe she. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
That person.
Could live somewhere.
Uh-huh.
They definitely live somewhere.
They are a human that lives on Earth.
Yep. That is factual. That is factual. Growing up, what WWE pay-per-view was the most fun for you to watch
Live or...
on TV?
I remember watching my very first WrestleMania. It was WrestleMania 2000.
Yes. That was the branding on that
Yeah.
is incredible.
That was the first WrestleMania I watched live on TV as it was happening.
The Fatal 4-Way.
Yes. So WrestleMania 2000, there was a lot of excitement around this. I also remember going to the theater. Remember when that was a thing?
No.
You would watch pay-per-views at the theater?
I never went. I do remember them happening.
So I went to the theater to watch the Invasion pay-per-view.
Okay.
So it was like when WCW invaded WWE. And like, we're just yelling at the screen and while also eating popcorn and drinking a giant soda. That was pretty cool.
The 2000s.
The 2000s. What a time to be alive.
Did you ever play WCW NWO Revenge?
That's a great game, but I would
Such a good game.
such a good game. The game that I always go back to is SmackDown versus Raw.
I never did that one. WrestleMania 2000 was stacked too.
Oh yeah. But SmackDown versus Raw, we would have like tournaments. Like we would go to my buddy Andrew's house and like play for hours and have like tournaments. And I always loved watching the entrances. And my friends were like, "What are you doing? Like
Skip through?
skip to the match." And I'm like, "No, we got to see the entrance." All right, we'll watch your entrance, but I'm skipping my character's entrance.
And then when you did WrestleMania, when you did Royal Rumble matches, how many times are you allowed to re-enter? Who are you going to pick?
Very good point.
Huh.
I love how you went to wrap up the interview, and I'm like, "No, let's talk about music." So I'm sorry. I will give this back to you.
My precious main album. Guys, Chris's channel is going to be linked down below. Go subscribe. Go check it out. The most incredible interviews. Truly.
You are too kind, my friend.
Lightweights. Out. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
That was great. You're the best.